The Apollo 1 mission, set to launch February 21st, 1967, was meant to be a test of the components developed for the Apollo program. This never took place, as a fire during a ground test killed all 3 astronauts about a month before the launch date. A long and thorough investigation followed. Throughout this video, you will learn the background information of the mission, details of the disaster itself, the under-equipped rescue attempt, and the findings presented to NASA engineers via the investigation. The AS-204 spacecraft, later dubbed Apollo 1, developed by NASA and constructed by North American Aviation, was supposed to be the first manned mission of the U.S. Apollo space program. The ultimate goal of the Apollo program, defined by NASA, is as follows: to establish the technology to meet national interests in space, to achieve preeminence in space for the U.S., to carry out a program of scientific exploration of the Moon, and to develop man's capability to work in the lunar landscape. The program culminated with the lunar landing of the Apollo 13 mission. The goal of Apollo 1's mission, however, was far from a lunar landing. Essentially, it was the test of the vehicles and technologies NASA was developing for the program, such as the command and service modules and the Saturn 1B rocket. The crew was to launch into a low Earth orbit and then return. The mission was planned to last up to 14 days. The crew members were Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. Unfortunately, the mission never made its target launch date of February 21st, 1967. On January 27th of that year, disaster struck on the launch pad at Cape Kennedy. Scheduled for that day was a manned pre-flight plugs-out test. This was to ensure that the spacecraft was capable of operating completely on internal power. Because the test was a ground test and required neither the spacecraft or launch vehicle to be fueled, it was deemed non-hazardous. This resulted in the ground crew being unprepared to handle a crisis situation. After the test was postponed by a few hours due to a foul odor in the cabin and communications issues, the test was resumed. At 6:31 p.m., one of the crew members, thought to be Grissom, reported a fire in the cabin. A few seconds later, Chaffee also reported a fire in the cockpit. The crew began trying to get out of the spacecraft. The temperature inside the cabin was rising dramatically as fire spread rapidly in the pure oxygen environment. The increased pressure caused by the spreading fire made the command module rupture. Flames and gas rushed out of the module. As air entered the cabin environment, it essentially quenched the fire, but caused heavy smoke and more toxic fumes to fill the cabin. The most immediate consequences of this fire were the lives of 3 American astronauts. They are the accomplished vets Gus Grissom and Ed White, and the rookie Roger Chaffee. There was also the millions of dollars worth of equipment, including the command module itself. The political fallout from this disaster could have caused NASA to be forced to cancel the whole Apollo program. By the time the program was finished, after Apollo 13, it would have cost about $25 billion. Which is $100 billion in today's economy. The political fallout from losing the space race to the Soviet Union would have changed history. Luckily, the U.S. government supported the Apollo program despite its failure. As soon as the crew members reported the fire and began their escape attempt, the ground crew rushed in. The command module ruptured before they could get to it, and flames, fumes, and smoke spewed out. The faulty breathing masks the ground crew had were not meant to deal with the intense smoke coming from the module. The ground crew also feared that the command module or the solid fuel rocket above it would explode because of the flames, which would likely have killed the ground crew and possibly destroyed the launch pad. These factors caused them to take 5 minutes to open the hatch, and then even more time to locate the astronauts' bodies through the smoke. After the astronauts were found dead, the investigation process began. This would start with the autopsies of the crew, whose bodies took 90 minutes to remove because the fire had fused the nylon spacesuits to the cabin floor. NASA also formed a review board immediately following the fire to review and recommend changes to the design. There were 21 panels on the review board, each with a specific task. They made a series of findings. The investigation process involved the complete disassembly of the module, and each individual part was examined, photographed, and cataloged. The module was eventually moved from the launch pad to a separate facility where another nearly identical module was brought in to examine and compare parts. The board also created a model to recreate the fire for the investigation. The review board and its panels concluded that the cause of the fire was a spark somewhere in the cabin, probably under Grissom's seat, which was due to faulty wiring. The fire spread so quickly and burned so hot because of the pure oxygen environment and the abundance of flammable materials in the cabin, such as nylon netting and nylon and Velcro restraints. This combination made the cabin a tinderbox, just asking for an excuse to ignite. Though they were thought to have burned to death, as evidenced by severe third-degree burns on much of their bodies, the autopsy suggested the crew actually became quickly unconscious and died due to carbon monoxide poisoning when the heat melted the air tubes. This means that the majority of the burns were suffered post-mortem. The fire caused the internal pressure to rise as well, which would have made it nearly impossible to get the hatch open from the inside. Even without the pressure, the overcomplicated 3-section hatch took far too long to open to make escape viable in case of a fire, and the crew had no firefighting equipment inside. Sabotage was ruled out as a possibility early on.